morning sun is stretching away to a foreign land with a sea of gray. To look upon me again in these golden times, they slip away like sands in the shadows of an ancient rhyme from a book of gold found years ago.
This is Riverside. Of course, all you see now is a busy intersection. But when I was growing up, on that corner over there was Riverside Grocery. Then on the opposite corner was Church's Grocery. The original store was built and run by my grandfather, Sid Buice. In this corner where I'm standing, my dad, Maron Buice, had a furniture and appliance store. Coming down Highway 20 into Riverside, you won't see any signs that say Riverside. They did name a local elementary school Riverside Elementary. And of course, the Chattahoochee River is still here. There is one sign here in Riverside that I think means more than just a name.
This is Riverside Baptist Church. It was established in 1921. This is where all of our family here in Riverside, this is where we went to church. We used to live over on Wrestling Creek, and we'd walk over here to this church. And I have a lot of good memories of this church here, Riverside Baptist Church. But this is a church that they left me one night asleep on the bench. So when we walked from here up to the house, my mother thought I was with my daddy walking, and my daddy thought I was with my mother walking. So when they got home, they wanted to know where I was at, and they realized that they left me asleep down here on the bench. So they said my daddy took off running, and he run down here, and I was still in there asleep on the bench. So that was the experience. And they used to say Milford, every time he come to the service, nearly he'd sleep on the bench there. He'd work hard, and he'd just go to sleep. But usually they had such long services, you get sleepy, you know, before you got ready to go. But my dad was a deacon here, and I remember this church, a lot of good memories. Riverside Baptist Church.
I remember going to Riverside Church when I was younger. Most all the families around this area went to Riverside. And I'm sure they've all got their stories to tell.
The boys down around Riverside here, we didn't call it, they call it Skuffle grip. I don't know how they got the name, but anyhow, that's what they call Riverside around here, Skuffle grip. And I think where they got their name, they used to they call it scuffling. Boys would meet down there at the store and get out there and wrestle. They wasn't mad at each other, nothing like that. They just get out there and wrestle and play around, but they called it Skuffle grip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your granddaddy started it.
Is that where it come from?
Yes, sirree. And the reason they call it Scuffle grip, was because so many boys scuffled, and it's gritty, called it Skuffle grit. Your granddad, Mr. Buice, done it. Right down there at Riverside. Yeah, I remember Skuffle grit. And his name was Mac Mullinack. And Tom Dispain and them lived down here on Grandpa's place right over from where we did. And that Sunday we had a baptizing. It was like about the 1st of June. And he come over there to help Mama do the washing the next morning.
That'll work.
And when he come back over there to do it, I said, Tom, I wasn't 6 years old or 5, between 5 and 6. I said, they had baptizing up at our church. They baptized people. And I said, and Mama's old hen had brought up some baby chickens and had them in a cup. And I said, let's go baptize. We baptized them, drowned every one of them. Every one you had. Down there, Wiley had his house right over there. You don't remember, do you?
Oh yeah, I remember coming up here and
all right.
And Granny Hush would be churning. I'd stand out there and hold my hand up and get the splatters on my hand and then lick it off.
And Mr. Wiley and them, every time when that year, Mr. Wiley and them had a cow brought over a little bull calf, and he'd sell me the bull calf every year. Every time I had a baby calf for $5. I mean for $1. And Ann and them was about, well, she might have been 16 or 17 years old. And me and my brother Dieter drove a little old calf, walked it down the road here. We got beyond where your mama's house, your granddaddy's house was. And a man named Mr. Carr had bought him a new Chevrolet, and he was a substitute for a mail carrier. And he'd bring our mail a lot of time. And we was going down the road, and he stopped his car and said, son, y'all want to ride? I said, Mr. Carr, I said, we got this calf with us. I'll put the calf in too. We put the calf in the back seat, me and Dieter did. He went on down by, that's when the old road down there went down there in front of my daddy's house. He stopped and let us out. We took our calf.
But they used to meet there and they'd have a contest. My dad sold weenies. Weenies come in about 10-pound boxes in those days, and you sell them by the pound. And they used to, the boys would get together and they'd say who could eat the most of them hot dogs, and just raw hot dogs. And so one day, Mr. A.D. Sudderth, he said, boys, can y'all suck raw eggs? And they said, well, we have. He said, I can suck 2 dozen. And they said, oh, you can't do that. He said, yeah, I can. And you know, he sat down there and he just cracked one of them right after the other, and he eats 2 dozen raw eggs right there.
Good God.
I won't never forget that. And but another time, I remember there's snow on the ground, and the boys they'd get out and track down rabbits. So they had 2 or 3 rabbits, and they come by the store, and they said, and Milford, he was around there, and they said, let's pull a little joke on Milford. Said, let's cut the head off of this rabbit, and we'll set it in the snow out here, and we'll tell Milford we found a rabbit out there, and said, he says that he can catch them in the bed. He's told us that he could catch a rabbit in the bed. So he said, so they said, okay, boy, that just suited them fine. So they had a head of a rabbit, and they fixed it out there in the snow just like it's in a bed. So Milford was around. They said, Milford, said, there's a rabbit out here in the bed out here in the snow. And he said, well, boys, let me show him to me. I can catch him. So he goes out there, and they show him, says, right there, see it? Can you see? Oh yeah, I see it. And boy, he started hollering, oh well, just as loud as he could holler, just it'd scare anybody to death. And I guess it'd scare a rabbit to death. That's the reason the old rabbit wouldn't move. Yeah. But anyway, he just hollered, and he made a dive for that rabbit, and he grabbed him by the head and just pulled it up, and all it was just the head of a rabbit, you know. So, boy, them old boys, they were just down rolling, just like Bedford, I'll never forget it. Now, you talk about really getting him now. He didn't have nothing to say for a long time there. But there's always pulling some kind of jokes on somebody. It wasn't anything bad, but just they just had a lot of fun, and that was where they'd gather up there at the store, and you'd hear some big tales sometime.
That's so.
But we had a lot of fun.
I was born at the mouth of Richland Creek in the Chattahoochee River, September 23rd, 1922. And we lived in that house, didn't have any water, gas, or electricity or anything like that. Then when I was about 6 years old, we moved to another house on Grandpa Perkle's place and lived there for a while. And I remember Daddy would take a tractor and cut land with it, and I fell off the tractor and it hurt my leg, and he stopped it and got it, and I was about 6 years old. I don't remember him building Riverside Church. I just remember Daddy had told me about it. My granddaddy gave the timber, Daddy done the sawing of the lumber, and Mr. Smith gave the land. And the people all come in and built the church and didn't know a thing when they got it finished. They had it completely built and paid for. I was growing on up, and we had a little. Daddy had a bunch of hogs down there, and he's killing his hogs in the fall of the year. And they had told us before then that you could take the salt from out of your box and throw it on a bird tail, and you could catch it. So we decided we'd do that. So Dieter and I went out there and got old Daddy's salt from about a 3-month period and tried to catch a bird. Never could catch a bird, of course. And we used up all his salt. And when he killed his hogs and was going to cure the meat, put salt on them the next day, didn't have no salt. So we got something else again given to us again. And another thing I remember, he had a sawmill down in a creek, down where's the creek. And we had a little red wagon. It's the only wagon we ever got for Christmas. We got it together. Each one of us, we owned half of it apiece. So we had that little wagon down there, and Mama was afraid we was going to get drowned in that water that's standing in a little pool down there. So she blacked her face and made us think she's a black woman. And she come through the woods and like to scared us to death. And when we got to the house, that's when we found out about it. Then she had down on that. Mama and Daddy wouldn't let me go to school when I was 6 years old because they're afraid I was too far from me to walk from down on about a half a mile or a mile from there back up to where the bus was at my grandpa's house. And so I had to wait till he was old enough to go to school with me. He was about eight years old. And we went to school, and that was when we first started to Sugar Hill School. Riverside School, or called the Brown School, it closed down that year, and we had to go to school up there.
41, right after I graduated from Lawrenceville High School, I was working at a drugstore, Jones Drugstore, on the corner there in Lawrenceville, across from the courthouse. And Ann was in a beauty shop right across the street in the corner of the courthouse. She had a beauty shop in there. She come down there one day for something, and we had curb service then, see, and she drove Ann drove me in over at the curb and pulled up and wanted me to come out there and bring them something. I forgot now what, a Coca-Cola, I guess. So So that's how I met her.
What?
That was in 41.
41.
We got married in 43. I went in March of that year, March of 43, and we got married in November of 43. I come on a 10-day leave, I reckon it was 15 day. Got married. And then she lived there on till 46 when I come out of the Army. We moved to Lawrenceville on Stone Mountain Street till 49, then we moved back to Beaufort. We moved in Miss Bice's house there for a while. I lived there a while. I built a house up on the hill there where Carol and them had for 1953, 52, 53, I think. And I lived there 20 years. Built a house across in front of Glad and Nan on Swanee Dam Road. And I lived there for 10 years. Sold that in 83, I guess I sold that out. And we lived about a year in Lawrenceville, in an apartment, back and forth. And I built another house over there in Henry Bailey Road in 84.
I'll never forget that little old store down there. They called it Buice Grocery, you know. And so anyway, we had that little store down there, and there's a lot of good memories of that thing. I used to go in there and I'd deliver groceries. Daddy let me drive. He had a little 36 Chevrolet pickup truck. And we'd deliver groceries out to the old people that couldn't come get them. And I'd drive that little, I was just a little teenager, but I remembered nearly every road we had around here was dirt road. So I got in that little old truck. One day I was taking some groceries down here to a family, and I'd go around a curve and I'd kind of speed up a little and let it slide around the curve. And somebody saw me. So they come and told my daddy on it. So Mr. Buice said, I don't know, probably you didn't know it, but said, your son, he's driving pretty reckless, that little truck. Said, I saw him come down the road today. Said he come around that curve sideways. And said so anyway, when I got back to the store, my dad asked me about it. He said, son, have you been driving pretty reckless, that little in our truck? And I said, well, I don't know, I reckon not. And he said, well, as the man told me, he saw you going around the curve on, said just making that thing slide around the curve. So anyway, that cut, he said, I better not hear of that anymore. And he said, you won't be driving that truck anymore till you learn how to behave yourself when you driving that truck. You can't be reckless. That's too dangerous. About that little store, my daddy sold a lot of different things there, and he sold some batteries there for a car. And I had an old Model T Ford. So one Sunday, they was all gone, and me and Claude Freeman, we was here at the house, and so I said, let's get out. No, he wanted Michigan. He said, let's go drive that little Model T. Well, I tell you, the battery's bad in it, and I'll have to get a battery slip one out of Daddy's store down there. I said, let's go down there and get a battery out of the store, and we'll ride that Model T while they're gone. So we go down there at that little store, and we got us a battery, and I had to wire it up on the running board of that little Model T we got it cranked up, and boy, we was going down the road, and I was driving it pretty fast, and went around a curve, and it kind of the front end kind of got loose. It wasn't too good a car anyway, you know, Model T. So we went off down a field and kind of turned over on the side, and that Claude, it throwed him out on the ground, and the battery went rolling down through the field there, and I jumped out, and I went down there and didn't even see about Claude. He was laying there on the ground, and I took off after that battery to see if it tore up that battery, because I knew I'd be in it if I'd have trouble with my dad there if I tore up the battery. So I took off after that battery, and all it was, it just got it kind of dirty and all. We brushed it up, and we slipped that thing back in the store. So that was our last time we got a battery out of that little store. One day I was down there, and I was working around in the store, and Mr. Potts come in, and he was always looking for bargains. So he said it was some, I believe it was pork and beans, the best I remember. He said, "What do you get on them pork and beans?" I said, 15 cents, 2 for 35. He said, "Give me 2. So I got him 2, and he went ahead and paid me. Well, I thought that was smart, you know, me doing something like that. So in a little while, my daddy come back in, and I was kind of laughing. I said, "Boy, I got a good one while ago on Mr. Potts." And he said, "What was that?" "Son, you didn't do that, did you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Now that's wrong. You get on that bicycle and you take Mr. Potts' knuckle back down there to him." Said that's bad. I wouldn't thought about you doing that. So I just thought it was smart, being smart, but it wasn't too smart.
My daddy bought a place from my granddaddy and my granddaddy, grandmother, and uncle's place, which was the estate. Bought 100 acres of land for $6.50 an acre. We was having a time of paying for it. Mama didn't want him to buy the place, so we ended up going to use up all our money. And so I went down to Lawrenceville when I was 12 or 14 years old, and I talked to Mr. Harris, who was the county commissioner. And I said, "Mr. Harris," I said, "my daddy," and I went to tell him about it. He said, "Oh yeah, I know Charlie and Erskine." Said, "I know him good." And I told him, I said, "My daddy bought this place, and he got a lot of good oak timber on it, and he can saw that timber and be some good timber, and I'd like to get a bill from you to sell you some lumber." So he gave me a bill for, finally he says, "Son, that's a lot of, we don't even give grown men bills for 10,000 feet. Said, that's a lot of land, a lot of lumber." So he went ahead and gave me a bill anyhow for 10,000 feet, because you could sell your oak timber for $20 a thousand. You couldn't sell oak timber out to anybody else for but $10 a thousand feet, and they'd sell all the pine timber you could cut. Well, he gave me that, and he said, "By the way," and I got talking to him about his son, Mercer Harris, who was a scout was playing basketball with Troy Thompson. He was our coach in Sugar Hill, and he liked it because of talking about his boy, because I'd been told if I'd refer to him, he'd go along with me on about anything. So I was trying to use a little influence there that I had heard about. So so he said, "Son, you want to go out to Chain Gang Camp with me and eat dinner?" I said, "Yeah, I sure do." So I went out there with him, and I remember what we had to eat. We had cabbage and had streak of lean meat. He had a convict to bring me a big plate of it, and I eat it. and I ate it all up. He said, "You want some more?" I said, "I believe I do." So I ate some more, and I ate it, and we come on back to up there, and I was talking to him. I said, "Mr. Harris," I said, "My brother, you give me a bill for him too? I'd like to have another 10,000 feet." And you know, I fooled around there, and he let me have it. He gave me another bill for him, and so what I did after that, I told Daddy. Daddy was surprised. He couldn't get over how in the world I got a bill for 20,000 feet. 20,000 feet. He gave me a check for $400 and something, and Daddy went and paid Mr. Mold Cole off his $350 he liked having it paid for. And he was happy with that. I would have been somebody give me $100,000.
I had a lot of memories about the little grocery store, and I remember at one time my dad just didn't open his store on Sunday, and he always said, if I can't make a living 6 days a week, that I need to get out do something else. But anyway, this particular Sunday, when he got to church, one of the ladies said, "Mr. Buice," said, "I didn't think you opened your store on Sunday." He said, "Well, I don't." She said, "Well, I come by this morning and I saw you with the door open. Somebody was in there and said, I didn't think you would sell anything on Sunday." He said, "Well, I tell you what it was," said, "I really don't open on Sunday, but," said, "the pastor of the church here come by the house this morning, wanted to know if I'd open a store for him and get a loaf of bread." So they never did say any more to him about opening the store on Sunday. One Sunday morning, the preacher, he was preaching, and he brought up, said, "You know, said the church is cold here at Riverside." Said, "We're just not having good services here," and said, "I know there's some people that's got something against different ones and talking about them, so we need to get that straightened out." Said, "This morning, what I'd like for you to do," said, "if you've got something against somebody here in the church, I want you to go to them and apologize or whatever. I want you to make it right. We want to get our church going good here." And so anyway, Ms. Bullock went to Mr. J.D. Sudderth, and she said, "Mr. J.D. said, I do want to apologize." I said, "I have been talking about you. I said some things I shouldn't have said. And I said, I want to apologize." And Mr. J.D. said, "Well, let me tell you something now, Ms. Bullock." Said, "While you was talking about me, I wasn't letting you rest either." Church one Sunday night, service was going on, the preacher was preaching, and Mr. J.D. Sudderth, he was there, and the old pews, we call them benches then, you know. So the benches there in the church had a lot of knot holes in them. So Mr. J.D. Sudderth was just I guess, I don't know, just fooling around, and he put his finger in the knot hole there in the church and got his finger hung in that knot hole. And he was trying to get it out. He was making, making a scene there. Yeah. He was messing around there, and they got his finger hung in that knot hole, and it was disturbing whole church. It just, finally the preacher just had to stop. And he said, we'll have to see what's the problem there. Well, Mr. Sudderth seemed to be having a problem there. And then later on, Mr. Sudderth said, said, there wouldn't have been anything to it there, hadn't been for them Buice girls laughing. And I said, there's the one that got disturbed going. So May and Minnie and Ann, all of them was sitting on the pew there together, and they saw him with his finger hung in that knot hole in the church. So they got to laughing.
Dad and Mama would always send me through the week, I'd have to go and carry the eggs and butter to Parsons. And they'd say, get a can of this, and a box of this, and 5 pounds of this and that. And I got to noticing they'd buy, they'd offer them like a can of oysters or a can of salmon, say 10 cents a can or 2 for a quarter. No, if you bought 2 of them, it'd let you 3 for the price of 2. So I got to buying them myself and paying for them, and I sell them to mom and daddy for making a little profit. I had about 25 rabbit boxes. I'd catch rabbits, and I'd fix them, and every Tuesday and every Friday, Coy Eccles would come by and pick them up, give me 10 cents a piece for them. And at that time, we'd school lunches had started in Sugar Hill School, and I could buy lunch for a nickel a day. So I bought all my lunches and bought all my clothes after I was 12 years old. The rabbits wasn't the only thing. I hauled slabs and anything I wanted, anybody wanted hauled in an old T-model Ford, no cow. I drove a school bus when I was in the high school, and gave me 50 cents a day for driving it for the first year. Second year, they hired me and gave me $1 a day for driving it. I drove a bus the whole year that year. Never had a bit of trouble, never had a flat tire. Only thing I had trouble doing was cutting trees down, putting between the wheels where we get up hills where it had mud there. The thing wasn't, we'd get stuck and have to try to get out like they never got out. All right, I went in service October the 1st, 1942. I was 20 years old. I had a busy year that year. I went in service, stayed there 3 years, and stayed there 3 years, 3 months, 11 days. But in that first year, I finished high school June the 1st, 1942. Got married November 30th, 1942, and it was sort of a busy year.
How did you and Ann meet?
Never did meet. We just rode up together. We went to church all the time. Yeah. And she was my high school, grammar school, high school sweetheart. November the 30th, when I got married, I came home. I was stationed up in Smyrna, Tennessee, and I got to Atlanta at the Union Station, and I couldn't find them. And being I couldn't find them, I had to go out to my aunt's house and spend the night. And she come on back home, and we got married the next day. I stayed home 3 days and went back for service. I was in the 5th Air Force, and I was a ground crew man. I would stay out late in the evening till all the planes come in, or if the plane had been shot up or somebody had been hit by a plane, they was trying to shoot them out of the sky. I'd have the ambulance out there, the fire trucks out there, and we'd put foam on the strip. Put foam deep on the strip. After every plane come in, everyone I was in New Guinea, and Okinawa, and Iwo Jima. And when the war ended, I was on Iwo Jima, and I was on that island when Ernie Powell was killed, and him and the colonel was killed at the same time. The snipers, we landed there on Iwo Jima, and it was raining so hard that night and we couldn't have no lights at all because the snipers were still everywhere, and those snipers, and I had to put my tent up out in a place way by myself, and put a poncho down and sleep on it. And we've been out there that evening. It's gonna fly so many thousand sorted planes against the Japanese Empire. That next day gonna be the greatest flight had ever been. and we'd work hard. I'd help do everything that day, and we come in, and I started in my tent, and I got in my tent. My mess kit was hanging on a little one of the posts that held the tent up, and I reached up and got it close to me, and a Jap shot my mess kit out of my hand, busted my mess kit all to pieces and blowed it in my face, and I had to draw another mess kit even before I could eat. And the same evening, we had a man that was just come in and sit down out there, and a Jap shot him, a sniper shot him. And I lost Raymond Higgins, a boy that I went in service with. Raymond got killed. And while I was on Iwo we had I slept in the center, and a man that end and the other end of me, and we had our mosquito nets over us, and they threw theirs back, and we was going to have a lot of different foods the next day because it was near Christmas time, and they said to me, y'all be sure to get everything ready for us tomorrow. And I lost both of them got killed that night. And next morning wasn't nobody there but just me. And but I was up at Smyrna Air Base when Joel got burned, and my captain called me down and said, "Come out here and sit down." I sat down. He told me my story. Told me the story of what happened to Daddy, all of them, and about the house burning, my brother being burned bad. And he said, "Don't you go down there to Red Cross, and you ain't got much money, have you?" I said, "No." He said, "You're going to need some money." I went down there and told him the story, and I come back. He said, "Did he give you any money?" Anything? I said, "No, sir, he didn't give me nothing." He said, "How long would it take you to get home?" I said, "Well, I get on a train tonight at 6 o'clock, be about 8 o'clock in the morning before I get to Atlanta." He said, "Come on, get your bag and everything, let's go." Went out there, we got a B-24. He flew me to Atlanta in that B-24, landed down there, had a staff car to meet me, carried me out to the bus station. And then I saw Willie Mae Holcomb out there. I remember that, seeing her, and she told me Joel had already died. Joel, he was 13 years old when he died.
His buddies.
Burnt all everything up we had, and he died.
Joel was ironing, and instead of putting, he thought it was kerosene. He was
they carried him up.
fuel oil. I think
Joel brought you all to house, Mayor?
Daddy carried him to Gainesville to the hospital.
I think he stayed at your house
and Daddy
to the church and the funeral.
I remember seeing the house burn. I ran out to the
when the house burned. My captain said to me, he says, "I'm gonna give you 2 3-day passes," and says, "Use this one when this is up, and then tear it up. And then you have this. I'm gonna mail you a furlough for 30 days, cause you're gonna be needed at home." So I come home, and I was home, and I got a letter, and Dieter got a letter also. Every man in my outfit gave me $1 a piece. And everyone in Dieter's outfit gave him $1 a piece, and there's about 300 in each one of our outfits. We had about $600. We gave Dad the $600, and the $600 that was given to him, plus us cutting a little bit of timber while I was home on furlough. They built a house back.
I went in 44, and I just finished high school, and then I got my notice to go, draft notice to go, and I immediately went right on in. Around Riverside, of course, there wasn't any young men around here then, everybody was in service. Sad time at my parents, they hated to see me leave to go to the service, Yeah, I come home, I got the Red Cross, helped, and my dad was real sick, and they called me and said that I need to see if I could get home,
And I didn't have any idea that I could, because we was getting ready to finish up our training. I only had I liked about 2 or 3 weeks getting all my training in, you know. And but they let me come home, and I got to see my dad. He was in the hospital, Emory Hospital, and that's the first thing I did. I went down to see him, and he said, "Well, I'll be home tomorrow." They said, "I'm a lot better today. I'll be home tomorrow." But then I come on back home, and he passed away that night. So anyway, that left my mother with the store down here. See, he had that grocery store at that time, and when I got back to camp, they said, "Well, your group has already shipped out that you took, you know, your training with." And he said they went to Europe. So we got on the train there in Camp Blanding, and we went to Fort Ord, California. And they did tell us that we was going to Pacific. And the war's kindly winding up a little bit then, but they was doing some heavy fighting. But anyway, our group went to Okinawa. We hadn't been there but just a few days until they announced the war was was over. They announced that our group was going to Japan, to occupy Japan. We'd be the first troops to go into Japan. So, although we didn't know what we'd run into when we got in Japan, but we all got off the ship, and we didn't know how the people would react to us, but we went marching. But at that time of morning, I think everybody in town, men and women and kids, was there, and they was lined up on each side of the street. And so we said, "Well, we don't know, you know, what's going to happen here." But did you know you could, as the old saying is, you could hurt a pin drop. Nobody said anything, but they was nice to us. They'd help us, and they'd do anything they could for us. The men and the women that was there. Well, they wasn't but 40 men in our company, and by that time they had transferred me out of the infantry into the transportation corps, they call it. Our job was to guard the ships when they come in. You know, you always run up on a guy that's you can call you buddy, and so I was with one, and his name was Harold Brown. He lived in Indiana. We used to visit. He used to come out here. He passed away a few years ago. Me and him got to talking, and he said, "You know," said I was told that they need somebody to cook, and said, that'll be a good job. So let's me and you apply for that job. I said, "I never have cooked." I said, I had 4 sisters, and they always took care, and I was the youngest one. We took a job cooking. I said, "Well, anybody can cook potatoes, you know." We always had potatoes, you know. But I guess the thing that dwells with me more than anything while I was in service, and they was a line, most of them kids. I'd say there was at least 50, could have been 75. It was a long line, I know that, and some adults. As we come out of there, as the guys come out of the mess hall, they'd have some food left in their little old mess kits, and they'd dump it had a 50-gallon barrel sitting out there. I don't know, about 50 feet from the mess hall. And so those kids was lined up, and when people would throw their scraps over in that 50-gallon drum, they'd be there getting it, and something to eat. And you can't imagine, that's
I don't even sound real today because you know it's a rich country today, but I'm telling you how it was then. As orderly as you ever seen, and yeah, you're exactly right, but they wasn't. And I reckon they realized they all were hungry. You know, but she had a baby on a little bag in the back, on her back. That's the way they carried them. They didn't carry them in the arms. I helped her. I gave her some bread one morning, and I couldn't understand what she was saying, but I know she was thanking me. She was buying, you know, to me, and I know she was thanking me, because some of the guys wouldn't do that, you know. She would come to the back door. She'd find out when I was working. I'd just take her food and give it. I said, well, if I get in trouble, I'll just get in trouble. We was near, not too many miles from Hiroshima. They had some big trucks, open body on the back, and they had us all to get in those trucks, and we took us over to Hiroshima. So we went on into town on those trucks. They wouldn't let us get off. They just they had not really graded, but they'd pushed the rubbish back and had a road around it where we could drive around the town. And then I saw 2 or 3 buildings. They looked pretty good a long ways from them, but when you got up there, they was just like a shell, like, you know. It's just like you just sucked something up out of them. And I didn't see a living thing, no green grass or nothing. I can't even explain how bad it was. So we moved to another little town. They called it Kobe, K-O-B-E, I believe. And in fact, I stayed there till I got ready to come home. When we first got on the ship to come overseas, we started up the gangplank, and the Salvation Army was there with a band playing, you know. And so I was already homesick. My goodness, I'd never been away, just a country boy. I'd never been away from home, and spent only nights nearly that I'd spent away from home was with my grandpa, you know. And the Salvation Army band started playing Georgia on My Mind. Looks like they could have played something else. The first night out, we got in a storm, and the ship, I'm telling you what, there again, I was raised up here on the river, and we had a boat that we used, but didn't even have a motor on it. We called it poling the boat, you know. We'd pole it up and down the river and fish, and I was used to a little old boat, but nothing like this. That ship, we was in the storm, and there was a bunch of people on there. They was like myself. I admit it, I was scared, because I'd never seen nothing, never. But anyway, I got sick, and I stayed on that ship for 31 days, and I was sick about 30 days out of that 31 days. It's a strange thing how you was so sick going overseas, but when they told you could come back home, you didn't get sick on the way back. And that was true. But we didn't get in a big storm like we did that first time. Fort McPherson to get out of the service. And I remembered they asked me, said, would I like to enlist for 2 or 3 more years? And I said, I believe I'll pass that up right now. We got to Fort Mac. I told my parents, my mother, and I wanted to surprise her. And so I didn't tell her when I was coming home. When I got home, it was dark. It was probably about, it wasn't much over 8 or 9 o'clock. Some of them had got out already, and they was having a party there at our house, and I had no idea that was going on. So when I got there, I heard a lot of racket in there. A bunch of Buices, they can stir up a bunch of rackets, So I just stood at the door for a while and listened. And boy, they was making 100 miles an hour talking, May and Minnie and Ann and Marie, all of them was just, and my mother too. But anyway, they had had a few of the neighbors in there, They didn't know that I was coming in that night. They knew I was coming, but they thought it'd be a few months, And so anyway, I knocked on the door. I didn't. When they come to the door, they had another hoopy come out, and so I went in there and joined them, and we all had to. And I guess we must have sat up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, just talking.
Went in March of '43. Went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for my basic training. Took the basic training there the summer of '43 and up till Christmas. I guess in December or either 1st of January, I went to Tennessee maneuvers. Stayed up there doing the ice and snow and everything else outside. Didn't have nowhere to sleep except on weekends. We'd have a fire after project motor time was over about a Thursday, and we could have a fire till Sunday afternoon. We built up an outside fire. Mar there to Edinburgh, Indiana. All the privates and PFCs of the division was pulled out and went to other divisions to kill them full strength where they could go to D-Day invasion. And most of the people that was in our outfit went to D-Day invasion. I happened to be a corporal at that time, and I got to say, October '44, we moved us up to Miles Standish, Massachusetts. We stayed there about a week before we went overseas. And we went overseas there was a crowd on that one, and we went overseas without a escort. At that time, on one ship, the sailors told us that the ship we was on would outrun any submarine they had. And we changed courses every 10 minutes. They said it took 10 minutes for them to zero in on you. And every 10 minutes we'd done a rigger. You could see our little, looked like a little S behind the whole way up through. So one night I was laying there in my bunk, and it looked like my feet went up about 2 feet. And it stayed that way a while. I went off to sleep, and the next morning I asked one old sailor, I said, I want to ask you a question. I said, what happened last night? It sounded like y'all opened this thing up wide open. He said, we did. I said, we spotted a submarine. And so we outrun him. And went to England, went across the English Channel, caught the Seine River, and went in France, and went up about a day in the river. And we got off one night. We slept in the pasture that night with the cattle. It had bad weather, it was raining. We got 2 hours to get packed up. We're going to go to the front line up in Germany, Brussels, Belgium. So we rode in a 2.5-ton truck that day, just about all day. A bunch of long faces. It got snowing on us before we got up there. When we got in our position, we relieved the 2nd Division. I was in the 106th Division, which was a new division just formed in Atterbury, Indiana, with an average age of 19 years old. So we pulled our gun. I was in the artillery. We pulled our gun in that position that they already had in there, and all the rest of the battery did. And so he said, well, we'll probably be here all winter now. That was the 10th day of December. And it was about a week. We stayed there. It's the 16th day of November. About 2 o'clock one morning, they started shelling us. Fireworks falling all around. Time shells, and some of it hitting the floor and blowing up. So I was back in a little old house. Me and half of my section was sleeping. So I had an old boy from Texas. He was old enough to be my daddy at that time. He woke me up, and I didn't take me long to get awake. He says, Thompson. He said, wake up. He says, just shelling hell out of us. So I never forget him saying that. So I got down there, got dressed. I was upstairs, got down, ready to go, and the whole downstairs was crowded with them, and there wouldn't none of them go out the door because it was fireworks was going on. See, they're shelling us. So I said, we got to get out of here before it hits the house and gets us all. So I led the way and got out of there, and we got our bump to guns all right, and didn't nobody get hurt. So that was about 2 o'clock in the morning. So about night, about daytime before we started firing, and really fired all day that day. We really fired 10 rounds at a time. I remember when we was in training, they said if you had a good crew, you could get 3 shells in the air at one time. I was in a 105 howitzer, and it had 7 powder bags with each shell. I got one of the shells in there, and it was separated. The bullet part that blew up was separate from the other. We had to put them together. So that night, about dark, we got orders to move. So we was going to pull back, see. And we got ready, got hooked up, got out there in the road, lined up, and my gun was laying back there in the road. The boy hooked it up, and they forgot to put the latch down on the back, and the gun had bounced off. So I told him I was just going to leave my gun. So the old lieutenant come back there. He says, go back there and get your gun. He says, we'll wait on you. He says, we're all going the same way. So I went back, got my gun, got back up there. There was a half track that got behind the truck I was supposed to be behind. So he come back there and he says, there ain't but one road we can go. He said, he's going the way we are, so just follow him. I said, okay. I stopped, and I thought I had been gone too long. So I got out to see what the score was, and that half tank had broke down, and the convoy had gone. So I didn't know what to do except I pulled around him and headed out. Then everybody followed me. They couldn't see nothing. We didn't have no lights on that night, that's for sure. And it was real cold. The driver couldn't see nothing, so we put the windshield on the 2.5-ton truck straight out. I got on the right fender up there, and I hollered to the driver. I said, left or right, left or right. It was that dark. You couldn't see nothing. there's a crossing there, and I didn't know which way they went. So I got out, and I had to get down on my hands and knees and see which way the traffic, but most of it went. So I discovered that most of it went straight on. So that's the way we went. So I looked back in the back that time, and it was just crammed full of people. People who would stop, they'd get on there. I don't know where they come from, but we had that bunch of people that wasn't in our outfit on there. So next morning, about 2 o'clock, I guess, it'd been about 4 or 6 hours, about 2 o'clock, I saw some tail lights, went over a hill, and I saw some tail lights. I said, well, told the little driver, I said, we're coming somewhere. It's a bunch of Germans yonder, our truck's one, we'll see. So we pulled up behind the truck we're supposed to be behind. And we went in position down there, right off the little old field road, and that night we didn't fire anything till the next day. We fired a little bit, but it was all low powder. It was either 2 or 3, and then we dropped down to, I think, to 1 at one time, and then we just quit firing. And I know we found out later that they were so close to us that we couldn't fire on them. See, they was really driving us. And that night, we fired that day, and that night, just about good dark, they started shelling us there. But all that day, a German would go up and down the road, the little old road up there, on a bicycle. So I kept raising Cain on it. I said, you got to stop that fella from going up and down that road there. So sure enough, that evening, about 3 or 4 o'clock, some of them stopped him up there, and he had a radio, 2-way radio. So he done put us in this, he knew, they knew exactly where we was at. So when they started firing that night, the first shell that fell on my gun position. And we was sitting up in the back of the truck, resting. And we headed to our foxhole, and they rocked us there for about 3 or 4 hours. We said we were going to have to move. So I got out there to load up my ammunition I had out there off the gun, and one of the shells was blown all to pieces. That round that come in there hit that shell and blew it all to pieces. So we went off down there, rode about a couple of miles, I guess, and then we sat there in the truck the rest of the night. Next morning, we pulled off down there about a half a mile, I guess, a mile. They pulled us into position in the woods. We didn't fire any that day. I guess we found out later on it's still moving and moving so close we couldn't fire. So me and the old truck driver dug us a hole there. Well, it's a foxhole, and the ground was so hard you couldn't stick a pick in it. So we had to cut it with an axe for about 3 feet deep. We dug a hole big enough to put your blanket in, stretch it out, and walk around it, about 6 feet deep. And we covered it with logs and dirt. We had about 3 foot of dirt on it, and big old logs about a foot in diameter we'd cut and put on there. We stayed there that night. Got up the next morning, and they said we got to move. So we got ready to move. Went out, the truck driver got the truck going, and it had 2 sets of rear wheels in the back. Had to 8 wheels back there. 2 behind 2, 2 behind 2. When it was locked up, it wouldn't move. So he couldn't move the truck. So he got out and undone the driveway safe somewhere going to that, and it still wouldn't move. So we had to load our stuff on a 3/4 ton, put our gun behind it, and we had all of our luggage in the back in a duffel bag stacked up. So we piled all that on the truck, and we piled on our different trucks. And 82nd Airborne Division opened us up a road, farm there, and we slept in the barn there, upstairs on the hay for about, that was about the 18th, and we slept there, I guess, till about the 22nd or 23rd of December. And it'd been ice and snow and sleeting and everything else, and it cloudy and rough weather. And that morning, the sun come out pretty and bright, and our Air Force got out. And that's when we started moving up. I never seen so many planes in my life. By 9 or 10 o'clock, it looked cloudy on account of so many vapors from so many planes. And them Germans, you was shooting them planes down. Some of them would come down, you could see the pilot bail out, and then you'd see the tracer bullets from them Germans shooting at them, coming down. And that was a rough day that day. But we went into position, I guess, about lunchtime that day. And we went to fire, and see that we'd lost everything in the whole division. We'd lost about 10,000 men that first 2 days. And artillery and some of the rear echelon troops and everything left. So they put us in where it was a wake spot, and they did a little extra fire. So we moved back and forth and do different outfits. We didn't know who it was. All we did was go by orders, and we fired there for moving them back so fast till they couldn't keep up with them. So we finally got back. See, we first went in position. We was on the border of the Siegfried line. And when we moved, I don't know how far back we went, but when we got back, we got to the Siegfried line, and that's when it pressure had eased up on us. So we bunked up in one of those bunkers on the Siegfried line there for about a week or more. We were just listening. They was still a moving. Infantry was moving so fast they didn't need no firepower. They was running in because they'd run out of gas and everything. Seeing they didn't have nothing to fight with. My battery went back to Mannheim, Germany, and we guarded the Seine River there at a pontoon bridge across it. The main bridge had been blown up, and it had a pontoon bridge on there, and we guarded that thing for a while. Well, the war ended while we was there guarding that. Then they moved us back in Belgium. We was in Belgium. We was guarding prisoners, 2, 3, 4 acres. I think it was about 10,000, 5 or 10,000 troops in there. It was full. And I went in there one night, and I had guard duty on the gate. And the old German come up to me. He says, cigarette. And see, they'd go wild over a cigarette. So I was smoking at that time, and I pulled a pack out of my pocket, and I flipped it up, and he got about whatever come up over there, about 5 or 6 cigarettes. He put them cigarettes and said thank you, and I saw he had some greenback in his pocket, in his hand there. So he handed me the greenback, and thank you, and moved on. When I counted that, and it was $20 bills. 27 $20 bills he handed me for them cigarettes. $540. At that time, they done took our inventory of how much money we had and how much money was drawing. I wasn't drawing but $10 a month over the pay table. I sent the rest of it back to May. So I'd send $10, $20 bill in a lick every time I'd write a letter. I got to where they wasn't censoring it. I'd write a letter and it went back home to her. So I got it back home like that. They moved me out of the artillery then. They quit using that, see, and I went to the 20th base post office. So I stayed with them and they shipped us back to New York. Shipped out from New York, then they put us down to Augusta, Georgia. And that was where I was discharged from, Augusta, Georgia, on January the 6th of 46. And carried us to the bus station in Atlanta. And that's where I met May and Ann and my oldest brother, Shorty, and Virgil. They met me there at the post office. At the bus station in Atlanta. And that's where we went home. And that was 3 years, 9 months, and 25 days, but it seemed like 15.
He was sitting in the car lot one time up there at Beaufort and showing a man an old car and had the radio on, and it come a newscast over the radio that had a bad tornado in Gainesville as of 1936. And so he said, Lord have mercy, my wife and my daughter's up there in Gainesville. That's where they worked. And he took off and he come to the school, got us kids. He was thinking, he did that before he even went up there. He knew we'd be scared to death, And he rode that. We all rode with him up there, but we couldn't get out of the car. He got out of the car, and you couldn't get into Gainesville. There's everything all over the road, and there's hauling dead people out in a big old truck, and so we were just scared to death. And my daddy, he started running, so he went on up in the middle of the town to see them. He said, you kids stay here in the car. And that's what we all did, but we were scared to death. We didn't know if Mama and Minnie was going to come out alive or not. That blew the top off of the building they were working in, but they didn't get hurt. But there was people killed all around them. No, Joe Mack was his daddy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But his name was Mack. What? Mack Wood?
That's what they called him, but Haskell was his real name.
Oh, okay.
Haskell Wood, but they all called him Mack. Yeah. And did you know, it wasn't too long till he started preaching. He was a preacher. He was pastor of this church right out here. Like what they call it,
White House or something.
When our house burned, people, we didn't have a one dime insurance, and so we had all of our kids, all of our clothes burned up. Anyway, we was at church, I know that. People around Riverside here, they they made up a lot of stuff. I mean, they didn't have any money to give him, but they brought groceries in and stuff like that. Well, what I was going to tell you, Hackwood, him and Stella Mae, that's his wife, and they had a kid or two, and they lived in an old house right out here on the right, just an old house. They lived in it. It was hitting it tough, and he couldn't get a job. So that morning, I remember it just as well if it was happened an hour ago. And I remember my dad, tears coming him and my mama's eyes, and looked up, and here come Hackwood with a peck of meal under his arm. Yeah.
Him being in rough shape.
Yeah, him in bad shape. And there he was, coming down the road with a peck of meal. Now, if that don't do something to you, Ronnie, I don't know what it do. And that showed love right there, didn't it? And that's lived with me all these years. I'll never forget that. And that's all he could afford. He couldn't afford that. Had a peck of meal. And he brought it. Said, Mr. Buice, I want to give you this. Lord have mercy. And that shows what God can do. He can change a person.